Hello guys, welcome to Percy Jackson. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy read the Naruto reincarnated in World of Nevermore? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Book. Between Worlds. Percy Jackson had survived the Titan War, bathed in the river Styx, and defeated Kronos himself. Yet somehow, the most dangerous thing he'd encountered lately was the boredom of a rainy Tuesday afternoon in Manhattan. He ducked into Arcane Bindings, a cramped bookstore wedged between a laundromat and a 24-hour deli. The shop wasn't his usual haunt. Percy wasn't exactly known for his love of literature, but the sudden downpour had forced him to seek shelter, and the faded sign promising unusual finds had caught his eye. A bell jingled as he entered, shaking rainwater from his dark hair. The interior smelled of old paper, leather, and something else, something that reminded him of the Oracle's chamber at Camp Half-Blood. Incense, maybe, or the faint residue of magic. "Hello," Percy called out, but no one answered. Shelves towered to the ceiling, packed with volumes of every size and color. Some looked ancient, their spines cracked and faded, others gleamed with metallic lettering that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. Definitely not your average Barnes & Noble. Percy wandered deeper into the store, trailing his fingers along the spines. Most of the titles were in languages he couldn't read. Some didn't even look like languages at all, just symbols or patterns that made his dyslexic brain ache. He turned a corner and found himself in a small alcove with a single reading chair and a table. On the table sat a book bound in what looked like black leather, though it shimmered with an iridescent quality that reminded Percy of oil on water. The cover bore no title, just an embossed spiral symbol that seemed vaguely familiar. Percy picked it up, surprised by how warm it felt in his hands, almost alive. "I wouldn't open that if I were you," came a voice from behind him. Percy spun around, instinctively reaching for Riptide in his pocket. An elderly man stood there, his white beard reaching almost to his waist, eyes the color of storm clouds. "Sorry," Percy said, relaxing slightly. "You startled me." The old man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That book isn't for casual browsing. It has a way of changing those who read it." "Changing how?" Percy asked, his curiosity piqued. After years of dealing with gods and monsters, cryptic warnings only made things more interesting. "It shows you worlds beyond your own. Sometimes, it does more than show." The old man stepped closer, studying Percy with unnerving intensity. "You're not an ordinary young man, are you?" Percy tensed again. "What makes you say that?" "The book called to you. It only does that to those who exist between worlds already." The man gestured to the spiral symbol. "Do you recognize this mark?" Percy looked again. "It reminds me of something, but I can't place it. It's the symbol of a warrior from another reality. A ninja who contained within himself the power of a nine-tailed fox demon." The old man's voice dropped to a whisper. "The book tells his story, or rather, one version of it, a version where he was reborn into a world called Nevermore." "Sounds like fantasy fiction," Percy said, though he knew better than most that the line betway fiction and reality was thinner than most people believed. "All fiction springs from truth somewhere," the old man replied. "The multiverse is vast, young demigod." Percy's hand tightened around Riptide. "I never said I was a demigod." The old man laughed, a sound like pages rustling. "You didn't need to. The sea clings to you like a second skin." He gestured to the puddle forming at Percy's feet from his wet clothes. "Poseidon's son, if I'm not mistaken." Percy didn't confirm or deny it. "Who are you?" "Just a keeper of stories." The man stepped back. "Take the book if you wish. It seems to have chosen you. But remember, reading it is a journey, not just of the mind." Before Percy could respond, the shop bell jingled again. He turned toward the sound, and when he looked back, the old man was gone. Percy stood alone in the alcove, the strange book warm in his hands. Common sense told him to put it down and walk away. Nothing good ever came from mysterious books offered by cryptic old men who knew too much. But Percy Jackson had never been great at listening to common sense. He tucked the book into his jacket and left the store, noticing as he stepped outside that the rain had stopped completely. The streets glistened in the sudden sunlight as if the downpour had never happened. Percy's apartment was empty when he got home. His mom had left a note saying she and Paul had gone to a faculty dinner and wouldn't be back until late. Perfect timing for some uninterrupted reading of potentially dangerous magical books. He flopped onto his bed and examined the book more carefully. The cover material wasn't leather after all. It felt more like some kind of metal, though it was flexible and warm to the touch. The spiral symbol seemed to pulse slightly under his fingers. "All right," Percy muttered to himself. "Let's see what's so special about you." He opened to the first page, which was blank except for a single line of text in the center. "To read is to travel. To travel is to transform." Percy turned to the next page, and the story began. Naruto Uzumaki died as he had lived, protecting those he loved. The nine-tailed fox sealed within him had kept him alive through countless battles. But even Kurama's chakra couldn't heal the wounds inflicted by the god tree. As his life ebbed away, Naruto smiled at his friends one last time, content that he had fulfilled his promise to bring peace. But death was not the end for Naruto Uzumaki. The combined chakra of the tailed beasts within him, the remnants of the Sage of Six Paths, power, and his own indomitable will created something unprecedented, a soul too powerful to simply fade away. He awoke in darkness, in a world where the sun never fully rose and ancient powers lurked in the shadows. A world called Nevermore. The words seemed to lift off the page, swirling around Percy like mist. He tried to put the book down, but his hands wouldn't obey. The room around him began to fade, the walls dissolving into shadows. "Not again," Percy groaned, as the familiar sensation of reality shifting washed over him. He'd been transported enough times, by gods, monsters, and magical items, to recognize the signs. The last thing he saw before his bedroom disappeared completely was the spiral symbol from the book's cover, now glowing with blue fire in the air before him. Then darkness claimed him. Percy awoke to the sound of steel against steel and someone screaming. He bolted upright, instinctively reaching for Riptide. He was no longer in his bedroom but lying on cold cobblestones in what appeared to be a narrow alleyway. Gothic architecture loomed overhead, buildings of black stone with gargoyles perched on every corner, watching with stone eyes that seemed too aware. The screaming came again, followed by a crash. Percy scrambled to his feet and ran toward the sound, uncapping Riptide as he moved. The pen expanded into a gleaming bronze sword, its familiar weight reassuring in his hand. He emerged from the alley into a small courtyard surrounded by towering spires. In the center, a woman in a midnight blue cloak was fending off three attackers with what looked like bolts of purple energy from her hands. She moved with fluid grace, but Percy could see she was tiring. Her attackers wore black from head to toe, their faces covered by masks that resembled ravens' beaks. One of the attackers lunged forward with a curved blade that gleamed with an unnatural green light. The woman barely dodged, the blade slicing through her cloak. Percy didn't hesitate. He charged into the courtyard, Riptide held high. "Hey, 3 against 1 seems a little unfair." The attackers whirled toward him, momentarily surprised by his appearance. Percy used that moment to close the distance, bringing Riptide to WN in an arc that forced the nearest attacker to leap backward. "Who are you?" the woman gasped, her eyes, a startling violet, wide with surprise. "Just a tourist," Percy replied, positioning himself between her and the attackers. "You okay?" She didn't have time to answer. The 3 masked figures regrouped and circled them, moving with the coordinated precision of trained killers. "The Whispering Council wants the sorceress alive," one of them hissed, voice muffled behind the mask. "But they said nothing about her protector." "Protector? I just got here," Percy said. "But if you want her, you'll have to go through me." The leader of the trio made a series of quick hand gestures that reminded Percy of something he'd just read, ninja hand signs. Before he could process that thought, the attacker slammed his palm into the ground. And the cobblestones beneath Percy's feet began to crack and shift. Percy jumped back, pulling the woman with him as the ground where they'd been standing erupted into a mass of writhing stone tentacles. "What the?" Percy started, but had to dodge as another attacker appeared behind him, blade whistling through the air where his head had been a moment before. Percy countered with a slash of Riptide. But the attacker moved with inhuman speed, seeming to flicker out of existence before reappearing 3 feet away. "They're using shadow step techniques," the woman said, her hands weaving complex patterns in the air. "Normal weapons won't be fast enough." "Good thing Riptide isn't normal," Percy replied. He concentrated, feeling the familiar tug in his gut, as he called on his connection to water. There was a fountain in the center of the courtyard, and at his command, the water rose in a massive wave and crashed into the attackers, momentarily disorienting them. Using the distraction, Percy charged the leader, Riptide, a blur of celestial bronze. This time, the blade connected, slicing through the attacker's shoulder. Instead of blood, a cloud of dark smoke poured from the wound. "They're not human," the woman said, her voice steadier now. "They're shadow constructs, assassins created by forbidden alchemy." "Of course they are," Percy muttered. Quote, "Because regular assassins would be too easy." The wounded construct hissed in pain or anger, Percy couldn't tell which, and made another series of hand signs. This time, its shadow stretched and expanded, forming into a dozen razor-sharp tendrils that shot toward Percy and the woman. Percy slashed at the tendrils, but Riptide passed through them like they were smoke. One wrapped around his ankle, burning cold through his jeans. The woman shouted something in a language Percy didn't recognize, and a barrier of purple light formed around them, severing the shadow tendril. The construct screamed, a sound like tearing metal. "We need to destroy their core," she said, her face pale with exertion. "The mask, it's what binds the shadow to this plane." "Got it," Percy said. "Can you keep that barrier up a little longer?" She nodded, though sweat beaded on her forehead. Percy closed his eyes, concentrating harder. He could feel water everywhere, in the fountain, in the damp air, even in the stone itself. He pulled on all of it, drawing moisture from every source until it swirled around him in a personal hurricane. The constructs hesitated, their masked faces turning toward each other as if confused by this display of power. Percy opened his eyes and thrust his hands forward. The water shot out in 3 precise jets, striking each construct in the center of its mask. But Percy wasn't relying on force alone. He'd learned a few tricks since his early days of simply dousing his enemies. As the water made contact, he mentally commanded it to freeze, expanding in the microscopic cracks of the masks. The masks shattered simultaneously, and the constructs collapsed into piles of ordinary shadow, quickly dissipating in the weak sunlight that filtered through the perpetual cloud cover. Percy turned to the woman, who was staring at him with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Her barrier faded, and she swayed slightly on her feet. "That was unexpected," she said. "I've never seen water manipulation like that before. Are you from the Northern Isles?" "Not exactly," Percy replied, capping Riptide and returning it to his pocket. "My name's Percy Jackson, and I think I might be a little lost." She studied him for a moment, her violet eyes seeming to look through him rather than at him. Finally, she nodded, as if coming to a decision. "I am Ravenna Nightshade, court sorceress to the Duchess of Ravenscroft." She gestured to the imposing castle that loomed over the city. "And you, Percy Jackson, are either the most fortuitous arrival in Nevermore's history, or its most dangerous." Percy's heart skipped a beat. "Did you say Nevermore?" "Yes," she replied, her eyes narrowing. "Why? Does that name mean something to you?" Before Percy could answer, a bell began to toll somewhere in the city, deep. Resonant notes that seemed to vibrate through the stones beneath their feet. Ravenna's face paled further. "The midnight bell. The city gates are closing." She grabbed Percy's arm. "We need to get to the castle before nightfall. It isn't safe in the streets after dark, especially not tonight." "What happens tonight?" Percy asked, though he had a feeling he wouldn't like the answer. "The hunt rides," she said grimly. "And they take any soul they find wandering the streets." She pulled him toward one of the narrow streets leading from the courtyard. Percy followed, his mind racing. Somehow, he'd been transported into the world from the book, a world where a ninja named Naruto had supposedly been reborn. But why was he here? And more importantly, how was he going to get back home? As they hurried through the darkening streets, Percy couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, not just by the stone gargoyles that adorned every building, but by something else. Something that had been waiting for him. Ravenscroft Castle was even more imposing up close, a massive structure of black stone and stained glass that seemed to have grown organically from the mountain it sat upon rather than being built by human hands. Spires twisted toward the sky like grasping fingers, and the entire edifice was surrounded by a moat that didn't contain water but something darker and more viscous that moved with a purpose of its own. Don't look directly at the moat, Ravenna warned as they approached the single bridge leading to the main gate. The void fluid responds to attention. Percy tried to keep his eyes forward, but couldn't help glancing down. The substance in the moat rippled, and for a moment, he thought he saw faces forming in its depths, familiar faces. His mother, Annabeth, Grover, all looking up at him with expressions of despair. He jerked his gaze away, his heart pounding. What is that stuff? Concentrated nightmare essence, Ravenna replied matter-of-factly. It shows you your deepest fears. The longer you look, the more real they become. Charming security system, Percy muttered. They crossed the bridge and approached the gate, which was guarded by Woe figures in armor that seemed to be made of the same shifting, iridescent metal as the book's cover. Their helmets completely obscured their faces, but Percy could feel their gaze on him. Lady Nightshade, one of them said, voice echoing strangely from within the helmet. The Duchess has been concerned by your absence. I was delayed, Ravenna replied coolly. This man saved my life. I'm bringing him as my guest under the right of sanctuary. The guards looked at each other, then back at Percy. He is unusual, the second guard said. The void fluid did not reach for him as it does for most outsiders. All the more reason to grant him entry, Ravenna said. Unless you wish to explain to the Duchess why you left her court sorceress and her savior outside during the hunt. The guards stepped aside, and the massive gates swung open silently despite their apparent weight. The Duchess will want to see you immediately, the first guard said. And your guest? Ravenna nodded and Ed Percy through the gates into a vast courtyard. Unlike the Gothic gloom of the city, the castle's interior was illuminated by thousands of floating lights that resembled fireflies but glowed in every color of the rainbow. What are those? Percy asked, watching as one drifted near his face, pulsing with a gentle blue light. Spirit wisps, Ravenna said. The essence of dreams given form. The Duchess collects them. Percy was about to ask why anyone would collect dreams when a new voice interrupted. Ravenna, thank the void you're safe. A tall, slender man with silver hair and eyes so pale they were almost white hurried across the courtyard toward them. He wore robes of deep green embroidered with silver threads that formed patterns similar to the hand signs the shadow constructs had used. Cage, Ravenna acknowledged with a slight nod. Your concern is touching, but unnecessary. I handled the situation. The man, Cage, stopped short, his pale eyes fixing on Percy with immediate suspicion. And who is this? Another stray you've picked up. This is Percy Jackson, Ravenna said. He intervened when the shadow constructs attacked me in the lower quarter. Cage circled Percy slowly, like a predator assessing potential prey. Shadow constructs, in the city, that's concerning. And you defeated them. The disbelief in his voice was evident. Percy met his gaze steadily. I had some help. He manipulates water, Ravenna added, with considerable skill. A water adept. Cage's eyebrows rose. From which house? I know all the elemental bloodlines in Nevermore, and I don't recognize him. That's because I'm not from Nevermore, Percy said, deciding that partial honesty was better than fumbling through lies. I'm from somewhere else. Clearly, Cage replied dryly. The question is where, and how you came to be in exactly the right place to save our court sorceress from an assassination attempt. Percy felt the weight of the book in his jacket pocket. Somehow, it had traveled with him. Would you believe I was reading a book and got sucked into it? Cage's expression darkened. You mock me, stranger. He's telling the truth, Ravenna interjected. Or at least, he believes he is. I sensed no deception in him during our escape. The Duchess will want to determine that for herself, Cage said. Come, she's waiting in the grand hall. As they crossed the courtyard, Percy leaned closer to Ravenna. Who exactly is Cage? He doesn't seem thrilled about my being here. He's the Duchess's shadow hand, her spymaster and assassin, Ravenna whispered back. And no, he wouldn't be pleased. Your arrival disrupts the careful balance of power he maintains. And the Duchess, what should I expect? Ravenna's lips curved in a small smile. Expect the unexpected. The Duchess of Ravenscroft is unique. They entered the castle through massive doors carved with scenes that Percy found disturbingly familiar, battles that resembled those from the ninja world described in the book. Complete with figures wielding elemental powers and creatures that looked suspiciously like the tailed beasts. The interior was a maze of corridors lit by the same floating spirit wisps. Their multicolored light casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. Percy tried to keep track of their path, but after the fifth turn, he gave up. If he needed to escape, he'd have to find another way. Finally, they reached another set of doors, these made of what appeared to be black glass that reflected their approach in distorted waves. "The Grand Hall," Cage announced unnecessarily. He placed his palm against the glass, which rippled like water at his touch. The doors swung open silently. The hall beyond was vast, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. The walls were lined with stained glass windows depicting more scenes that seemed to blend ninja battles with gothic horror, figures in armor and robes wielding both swords and what looked like chakra-based attacks against creatures of shadow and bone. At the far end of the hall, atop a dais of obsidian steps, sat a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive piece of crystal. The crystal was clear in some places, opaque in others, and seemed to contain swirling galaxies of light within its depths. Upon this throne sat a woman who could only be the Duchess. She was tall and regal, with skin so pale it was almost translucent and hair as black as a raven's wing that fell to her waist in elaborate braids interwoven with what looked like small bones and crystals. Her eyes were her most striking feature, completely black, without whites or pupils, yet somehow expressing amusement as they approached. "Court sorceress," the Duchess said, her voice surprisingly warm and rich. "You've brought us a visitor." Ravenna bowed deeply. "Your Grace, may I present Percy Jackson? He saved me from shadow constructs in the lower quarter." The Duchess's black eyes fixed on Percy with unnerving intensity. "Shadow constructs? Within my city walls? How vexing." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Percy Jackson, how did you come to be in my realm?" Percy stepped forward, aware of Cage's watchful gaze. "I'm not entirely sure, Your Grace. I was reading a book about a place called Nevermore, and suddenly I was here." "A book?" The Duchess's interest visibly sharpened. "What manner of book?" Percy hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out the black tome. The spiral symbol on its cover seemed to glow faintly in the hall's strange light. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Cage hissed and stepped back, his hand going to a weapon hidden in his robes. Ravenna gasped, her eyes widening in recognition. "And the Duchess laughed, a sound like crystal bells." "The Spiral Codex," she said, delight evident in her voice. "It has been centuries since it last appeared in Nevermore, and it chose you as its reader. How fascinating. You know this book?" Percy asked, surprised. "Of course," the Duchess replied. "It is one of the 9 artifacts of convergence, objects that exist simultaneously in multiple realities. The Spiral Codex contains the story of a warrior from another world who was reborn here in Nevermore." "Naruto Uzumaki," Percy said. The name seemed to echo in the hall with unusual resonance. Several of the spirit wisps flared brightly and then dimmed. "Yes," the Duchess said, her voice softer now. "The 9-tailed Jinchuriki who became the Sage of Nevermore. His coming changed our world forever." She studied Percy with renewed interest. "And now the Codex has brought you to us. The question is, why?" Before Percy could respond, a commotion erupted at the hall's entrance. The black glass doors burst open, and a figure staggered in, bleeding from multiple wounds. It was one of the guards from the gate. "Your Grace," he gasped, collapsing to one knee. "The hunt, it's begun early. They're inside the city walls." The Duchess rose from her throne, suddenly radiating power that made the air around her shimmer. "Impossible. The sun has not yet fully set. Something has disrupted the natural order," Ravenna said, her gaze falling on Percy and the book in his hands. "The boundaries between realms are weakening." "The Wild Hunt cares nothing for boundaries," Cage said grimly. "They will slaughter everyone in the lower quarter." Percy stepped forward. "I can help. I've fought my share of monsters." Cage scoffed. "The Hunt is not some collection of beasts, outsider. They are the primal forces of Nevermore itself, the nightmares that existed before the first dreamer." "Nevertheless," the Duchess interrupted, "we will accept your aid, Percy Jackson. She descended the obsidian steps with fluid grace. Cage, assemble the night guard. Ravenna, prepare the ward stones. Her black eyes fixed on Percy. You will come with me. I wish to see what the Codex's chosen can do. The Duchess moved with surprising speed through the castle corridors, her elaborate gown somehow never impeding her movement. Percy kept pace beside her, riptide ready in his hand. The Wild Hunt, Percy said as they hurried down a spiral staircase. What exactly are we dealing with? They are the oldest entities in Nevermore, the Duchess replied. Hunters that pursue souls caught between worlds. Normally, they ride only at the darkest hour of night, and only beyond the city walls. Her expression was grim. For them to enter Ravenscroft, and before nightfall, it is unprecedented. And you think it has something to do with me in this book? The Spiral Codex is a nexus of realities, she said. When it activates, when it brings someone like you across the boundaries, it creates ripples. Disturbances in the natural order. They emerged onto a balcony overlooking the city. From this vantage point, Percy could see chaos unfolding in the streets below. People ran screaming as shadowy figures on horseback pursued them. The horses were monstrous things with flaming eyes and hooves that struck sparks from the cobblestones. Their riders were even worse, humanoid in shape but with elongated limbs and heads that seemed to be composed of swirling darkness rather than solid matter. They're harvesting souls, the Duchess said, her voice tight with anger. My people, Percy gripped Riptide tighter. How do we stop them? The hunt cannot be stopped, only redirected. The Duchess turned to him, her black eyes reflecting the chaos below. They hunt those caught between worlds. Right now, that includes every citizen of Ravenscroft, because your arrival has placed the entire city in a state of flux. So they're after me, Percy concluded. If I lead them away from the city, they would pursue you. Yes, the Duchess agreed. But you would not survive long enough to draw them all away. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch surprisingly warm. There is another way. The Spiral Codex brought you here for a reason. Perhaps it can grant you the power to face the hunt. Percy looked down at the book in his other hand. How? I just started reading it. The Codex contains the essence of the nine-tailed sage, his knowledge, his techniques, his power, the Duchess explained. Those who are chosen by the Codex can access that power, to varying degrees. You want me to, what? Become Naruto? The Duchess smiled, a surprisingly human expression on her otherworldly face. Not become him, channel him. The book chose you because there is resonance between your soul and his, both warriors, both touched by divine power, both willing to sacrifice for others. Below them, the hunt claimed another victim, a swirling vortex of energy tearing a glowing essence from a fleeing citizen. The body collapsed, empty, while the riders moved on. Percy made his decision. Tell me what to do. Open the Codex, the Duchess instructed. Focus on the spiral symbol and repeat these words. 2 worlds, 1 path. 2 souls, 1 purpose. Percy opened the book to the first page, where the spiral symbol now glowed with an inner light. He took a deep breath and spoke the words. 2 worlds, 1 path. 2 souls, 1 purpose. The spiral began to spin, slowly at first, then faster. Lifting off the page and hovering in the air between Percy and the book. Energy crackled around it, blue and orange intertwining. Now, the Duchess said, reach into the spiral and take what is offered. Percy hesitated for only a moment before thrusting his hand into the spinning vortex. Immediately, knowledge flooded his mind. Hand signs, chakra pathways, techniques with names like Rasengan and Shadow Clone. Along with the knowledge came sensations. The feel of molding chakra, the balance required for walking on water, different from his natural ability, the focus needed to maintain multiple shadow clones. He gasped and staggered back as the spiral collapsed back into the book, which snapped shut. His body tingled with new energy that flowed alongside his demigod powers but didn't replace them. Interesting, the Duchess murmured, studying him. You've taken on aspects of the nine-tailed sage, but retained your own nature. Most who interact with the Codex are overwhelmed by its power. Percy flexed his hands, feeling the dual energies within him, the familiar pull of water and the new, vibrant force of chakra. I'm used to dealing with godly powers, he said. This feels compatible. A scream from below brought them back to the crisis at hand. The hunt had cornered a group of citizens against the castle walls. "Time to test your new abilities," the Duchess said. "Save my people, Percy Jackson, and Nevermore will be in your debt." Percy nodded and vaulted over the balcony railing. As he fell, he instinctively formed a hand sign he'd never known before today. Shadow Clone Jutsu. With a puff of smoke, 3 identical copies of Percy appeared beside him in midair. They looked at each other in surprise and then grinned in unison. "Okay, that's cool," the original Percy said as they landed on the cobblestones below, absorbing the impact with chakra-enhanced legs. The hunt riders turned toward them, their featureless faces somehow conveying hunger and rage. There were 5 of them, each mounted on a nightmare steed that pawed the ground impatiently. "Hey," Percy called out, riptide gleaming in his hand. "I hear you're looking for someone caught between worlds." "That would be me." The lead rider tilted its head, a sound like distant thunder emanating from where its mouth should be. It raised a spectral hand, pointing directly at Percy, and then charged. Percy and his clones scattered, drawing the riders away from the trapped citizens. 2 riders pursued the original Percy while the others each chased a clone. Percy ducked into a narrow alley, the riders close behind. Their horses were too large to follow, but the riders simply melted into shadow and continued the pursuit on foot, their forms elongating unnaturally as they squeezed through the tight space. Percy reached a dead end and spun to face his pursuers. They advanced slowly now, confident in their prey's capture. "You know," Percy said conversationally, "where I come from. We have a saying about cornered enemies being the most dangerous." He formed another hand sign, channeling chakra while simultaneously calling on his connection to water. "Let me demonstrate." Water erupted from a nearby drain, swirling around Percy in a protective vortex. At the same time, chakra gathered in his palm, forming a spiraling blue orb, a Rasengan, the knowledge supplied by the Codex informed him. The hunt riders hesitated, sensing the unusual combination of powers. Percy didn't give them time to reconsider. He charged forward, the water vortex propelling him like a missile. Water style. Rasengan impact. The technique was improvised, a blend of his natural abilities and Naruto's chakra manipulation, but it worked better than he could have hoped. The Rasengan, amplified by the water vortex, slammed into the first rider with devastating force. The creature shrieked as its shadowy form was torn apart by the spiraling energy, dissipating into wisps of darkness that quickly faded. The second rider backed away, but Percy was already forming new hand signs. Shadow Clone Jutsu. 2 more clones appeared, flanking the rider. Before it could react, all 3 Percys attacked simultaneously. Riptide slashing through the creature's insubstantial form while chakra-enhanced kicks and punches forced it further into solidity, making it vulnerable. With a final overhead strike, Percy cleaved the rider in 2. And it dissolved like its companion. Percy took a moment to catch his breath, marveling at how naturally the ninja techniques integrated with his demigod abilities. It was as if they'd been designed to work together, water and chakra reinforcing each other. A series of explosions from elsewhere in the city reminded him that his clones were still fighting. He closed his eyes, concentrating on the mental connection he now shared with them. One clone had already been dispelled, transferring its memories back to him. It had led its pursuer into a trap involving an overturned cart and several barrels of what turned out to be explosive alchemical compounds. The other 2 clones were still fighting, one near the fountain in the main square, the other on the rooftops of the merchant district. Percy decided to head for the square first, moving with chakra-enhanced speed through the now empty streets. He arrived to find his clone surrounded by 3 hunt riders. The one it had been leading plus 2 more that had joined the chase. The clone was holding them off with a combination of water manipulation and riptide, but it was clearly outmatched. Percy leapt into the fray, landing beside his clone. 2 against 3, he said. "I like those odds better." The clone grinned. "I was just softening them up for you." Together, they faced the hunt riders, moving in perfect synchronization. Percy found that he could anticipate his clone's movements as if they shared a single mind, which, in a way, they did. One rider charged, its elongated arms stretching to possible lengths as it tried to grasp Percy. He ducked under the attack while his clone leapt over it, both striking simultaneously from different angles. Riptide sliced through shadowy flesh while a chakra-enhanced kick shattered what passed for the creature's knee. The rider collapsed, but the other two pressed their attack, moving with unnatural speed. Percy found himself driven back toward the fountain, which gave him an idea. "Cover me," he shouted to his clone, who nodded and engaged both riders, keeping the clone engaged both riders, keeping them distracted with a flurry of sword strikes while Percy reached the fountain. He plunged his hands into the water, feeling the dual energies within him, godly power and chakra, merge and amplify each other. Water style. Tidal surge. The fountain exploded upward, water forming into a massive dragon-like shape that towered over the square. Percy directed it with precise hand movements, guiding the water dragon to engulf the hunt riders. As the water surrounded them, he channeled more chakra into it, transforming the liquid into chains of blue energy that bound the shadowy figures. "Now," Percy called to his clone, who leapt into the air, forming a Rasengan in each hand. "Double Rasengan strike," the clone shouted, driving both spiraling orbs into the trapped riders. The resulting explosion sent water and shadow fragments in all directions. When the mist cleared, nothing remained of the hunt riders but wisps of darkness that quickly dissipated. Percy's clone landed beside him, looking slightly winded but grinning. "That was awesome." "Yeah," Percy agreed, "but we're not done yet." He closed his eyes, focusing on his remaining clone. Through their mental link, he could see that it was still engaged with the final hunt rider on the rooftops of the merchant district. "Let's go." They raced through the streets, leaping from building to building with chakra-enhanced jumps that would have been impossible for Percy just hours ago. As they approached the merchant district, they heard the clash of battle, and something else. A woman's voice, chanting in a language Percy didn't recognize. They arrived to find Ravenna standing on a rooftop, her hands weaving complex patterns in the air as she recited an incantation. Purple energy crackled around her, forming a barrier that separated Percy's clone from the hunt rider it had been fighting. "Ravenna," Percy called out, landing on the rooftop with his second clone. She glanced at him, her concentration never wavering. "Percy, I've trapped the last rider in a containment spell, but I can't hold it for long. It's too powerful." Indeed, the hunt rider was throwing itself against the barrier, which flickered dangerously with each impact. The creature's form seemed to be growing, feeding on the magical energy of the barrier itself. "It's absorbing your magic," Percy realized. "The more power you use against it, the stronger it gets." Ravenna nodded grimly. "The hunt feeds on essence, soul energy, magical energy, life force. That's why they're so dangerous." Percy's mind raced. If the hunt fed on energy, then perhaps. "Ravenna, drop the barrier on my signal. I have an idea." She looked skeptical but nodded. "Be ready. It will charge immediately." Percy turned to his clones. "I need you both for this. Remember that technique from the Codex, the one Naruto used against energy-absorbing enemies?" The clones' eyes widened in understanding. "The natural energy absorption overload. But we don't have Sage mode." "No," Percy agreed, "but we have something similar. Our connection to the sea gives us a link to natural energy. If we can channel that through the Rasengan, it might work," the first clone said. "But it's risky. If we can't balance the energies, then we'll turn to stone." "I know," Percy finished, "but we don't have a choice. That thing will keep absorbing power until it's unstoppable." The clones nodded in unison, and all three Percys formed a triangle, their backs to each other. Facing outward, they each extended one hand toward the center of their formation, where their fingers touched. "Ready?" Percy asked. "Ready," the clones confirmed. "Ravenna, now," Percy shouted. The sorceress dropped her barrier with a gesture, and the hunt rider charged forward, its shadowy form billowing like smoke in a gale. Natural energy convergence. Percy and his clones shouted together. Power flowed between them, Percy's connection to the sea, the clones, chakra, and something else, something ancient and primal that seemed to rise from the very stones of Nevermore itself. In the center of their triangle, a sphere of energy formed, not the blue of a standard Rasengan but a swirling mixture of sea green and golden light. The hunt rider sensed the power and hesitated, its featureless face turning from Percy to his clones and back again, as if confused by their identical energy signatures. That moment of hesitation was all they needed. As one, Sai and his clones pushed the sphere of energy outward, directly into the Hunt Rider's chest. Sage Art. Natural Convergence Rasengan. The rider absorbed the energy as expected, its form swelling and distorting as it consumed the power. But unlike Ravenna's magic, this energy didn't make the creature stronger. Instead, it began to calcify, turning from shadow to stone from the inside out. The rider thrashed wildly, trying to expel the natural energy, but it was too late. Within seconds, it had transformed completely into a statue of black stone, frozen in a pose of agony. Percy approached cautiously, riptide ready. He tapped the stone figure with his blade, and it crumbled into dust that blew away on the night breeze. It worked, he said, somewhat surprised. His clones high-fived each other before dispelling in puffs of smoke. Their memories and remaining chakra flowing back into Percy. Ravenna stared at him in amazement. I've never seen anything like it. Not even in the ancient texts describing the nine-tailed sage's techniques. It was an improvisation, Percy admitted. A combination of his chakra techniques and my own abilities. A dangerous combination, came a new voice. Cage stepped out of the shadows of a nearby chimney, his pale eyes narrowed. One that disrupts the natural balance of Nevermore. Percy tensed, ready for an attack, but Ravenna stepped between them. He just saved countless lives, Cage. Including yours. Perhaps, the Shadow Hand conceded. Or perhaps he has merely postponed a greater disaster. He turned his gaze to Percy. The wild hunt does not enter the city without cause. They sensed something. Someone who doesn't belong. The Duchess seemed to think I was brought here for a reason, Percy countered. The Duchess sees potential allies everywhere. Cage replied coldly. I see potential threats. Before the argument could escalate, the air around them shimmered, and the Duchess herself appeared on the rooftop, accompanied by a swirl of spirit wisps that illuminated the night in rainbow hues. Peace, Shadow Hand, she said, her black eyes taking in the scene. The hunt has retreated beyond the city walls. Percy Jackson has indeed proven himself an ally this night. Cage bowed stiffly. As you say, Your Grace. The Duchess approached Percy, studying him with renewed interest. You've integrated the Codex's knowledge more completely than I anticipated. Most who attempt to channel the nine-tailed sage's power are overwhelmed by it. I've had some experience with godly powers, Percy said. And I'm only using a fraction of what's in the book. Wise. The Duchess nodded. The full power would likely consume you, as it did many before you. She gestured to the city around them, where citizens were cautiously emerging from hiding. You have earned Nevermore's gratitude, Percy Jackson. And its curiosity. I still don't understand why I'm here, Percy admitted. Or how to get back to my world. The Codex brought you here for a purpose. The Duchess said. Until that purpose is fulfilled, I suspect you will remain in Nevermore. She turned to Ravenna. Take him to the Eastern Tower. He will be our honored guest while we investigate further. Ravenna bowed. Yes, Your Grace. As the Duchess disappeared in another shimmer of light, Cage stepped closer to Percy. Watch yourself, outsider. The Duchess may trust you, but I do not. One wrong move, and you'll find my blade between your ribs. Looking forward to working with you too, Percy replied dryly. Cage vanished into the shadows without another word. Ravenna sighed. Don't mind him. He's protective of Nevermore and the Duchess. I get it, Percy said. I'd be suspicious too if some stranger with weird powers showed up in my world. He looked around at the Gothic cityscape. Now peaceful again in the moonlight. So, Eastern Tower. Ravenna smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It's the most comfortable of the guest quarters. And it has an excellent view of the sunrise. What passes for sunrise in Nevermore, anyway? As they made their way back to the castle, Percy couldn't help but wonder what purpose the Codex had brought him here to fulfill, and whether he'd like the answer when he found it. The Eastern Tower was indeed comfortable, if Percy's definition of comfort included Gothic architecture, furniture carved from what appeared to be petrified wood, and windows that looked out onto a perpetually twilight landscape. Still, the bed was soft, and after the events of the day, Percy was grateful for the chance to rest. He sat on the edge of the bed, the spiral codex open in his hands. He'd been reading more of Naruto's story in Nevermore, hoping to find clues about his own situation. According to the book, Naruto had awakened in Nevermore with no memory of his past life. Only gradually, through dreams and fragments of recollection, did he begin to remember who he had been. He'd discovered that his chakra still worked in this new world. Though differently, it interacted with the ambient energies of Nevermore in unexpected ways. Percy could relate to that. His own water powers seemed enhanced here, as if the very atmosphere of Nevermore was saturated with potential energy just waiting to be shaped. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. "Come in," he called, closing the book. Ravenna entered, carrying a tray with what looked like food and drink. She'd changed from her battle-worn cloak into a simpler gown of midnight blue that complemented her violet eyes. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. The kitchen prepared some local specialties. Percy approached cautiously. The food consisted of what appeared to be small, glowing mushrooms. Dark bread that seemed to shift slightly when he wasn't looking directly at it, and a goblet of liquid that changed color every few seconds. "It's not poisoned," Ravenna said, amused by his hesitation. "Though I understand your caution. Nevermore cuisine takes some getting used to." "What exactly am I looking at?" Percy asked. "Dreamcap mushrooms, shadow bread, and prismatic wine," she explained. "All perfectly safe for human consumption, I assure you. The mushrooms enhance mental clarity, the bread is quite filling despite its appearance, and the wine." She smiled. "Well, the wine is just pleasant." Percy picked up one of the mushrooms, which glowed a soft blue. "In my world, glowing food is usually a bad sign. In Nevermore, it's quite normal," Ravenna replied. "Many things glow here. It's a side effect of the ambient dream energy." Percy took a cautious bite of the mushroom. It tasted surprisingly good, like a blend of portobello and something sweeter, with a hint of mint. As Ravenna had promised, his thoughts seemed to sharpen immediately, the fog of fatigue lifting. "Wow," he said. "That's potent." Indeed. Ravenna took a seat by the window, looking out at the city below. "The Duchess has asked me to help you understand Nevermore while you're here. She believes your arrival is significant." Percy sat across from her, sampling the shadow bread which tasted like ordo with hints of cinnamon and the prismatic wine which changed flavor with each sip, from berry to citrus to something like honey. "What do you think?" he asked. "About my being here?" Ravenna considered the question, her violet eyes thoughtful. "I think the Codex chooses its readers carefully. The last person it brought to Nevermore was Naruto Uzumaki, and his coming changed our world forever." She studied Percy with renewed interest. "You share certain qualities with him, from what the histories tell us. Determination, loyalty, a willingness to protect others at your own expense. Quote, you got all that from watching me fight some shadow riders. That, and the fact that you jumped into danger to save a complete stranger in a world you didn't understand," she pointed out. "Not everyone would make that choice." Percy shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's kind of what I do. Where I come from, monsters are a regular occurrence." "Tell me about your world," Ravenna said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. "The Duchess mentioned you have experience with godly powers." Percy hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing. "I'm a demigod, half human, half god. My father is Poseidon, god of the sea." Ravenna's eyes widened. "A true demigod, not merely blessed by divine power, but born of it." "Yeah, there are quite a few of us, actually. We tend to attract monsters and get involved in situations." "That explains your affinity for water," Ravenna mused. "And perhaps why the Codex chose you. Naruto contained the spirit of the nine-tailed fox, a being of immense chakra. You contain the bloodline of a god. Both of you exist in the space between mortal and divine." Percy hadn't considered that parallel. "Maybe. But Naruto was reborn here, right? I'm just visiting. At least, I hope I am." He thought of his mother, of Annabeth, of Camp Half-Blood. "I need to find a way back." "The Codex is the key," Ravenna said. "It brought you here, it can likely return you. But first, you must understand why it brought you. Any ideas on that front?" Ravenna's expression grew serious. "Nevermore is changing. The boundaries between our realm and others have been weakening for some time. The wild hunt entering the city is just one symptom. There have been others, creatures appearing that don't belong, areas of the realm shifting or disappearing entirely. And you think I'm here to help with that somehow?" "Perhaps." She hesitated. "There's something else you should know. The shadow constructs that attacked me weren't random assassins. They were sent by the Whispering Council. The What Now? A secret organization that has existed in Nevermore since before recorded history, Ravenna explained. They believe they are the true guardians of this realm. That the Duchess and her court are merely temporary stewards. And they tried to kill you because I discovered something they wanted kept hidden. Ravenna lowered her voice, though they were alone in the tower. There's an ancient prophecy about the Spiral Codex and its readers. When the spiral turns thrice, the veil between worlds will tear, and Nevermore will face its final twilight. Let me guess, Percy said grimly. I'm reader number 3. Ravenna nodded. The first was Naruto Uzumaki. The second came decades later, a woman named Sakura Haruno, though the histories say little about her time here. And now you. So this Whispering Council thinks I'm going to bring about the end of Nevermore. They fear you might. Yes. Ravenna's gaze was steady. The Duchess believes otherwise. She thinks the prophecy has been misinterpreted. That final twilight doesn't mean destruction but transformation. Percy ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Great. Another prophecy about me potentially causing the end of the world. Just what I needed. Ravenna raised an eyebrow. This has happened to you before. More times than I'd like, Percy admitted. But in my experience, prophecies are tricky. They rarely mean exactly what people think they mean. The Duchess would agree with you, Ravenna said. Which is why she's granted you sanctuary despite Cage's suspicions. Percy glanced at the Spiral Codex, which seemed to pulse slightly in the dim light of the tower room. So what now? I just wait around until the reason I'm here becomes clear. For tonight, yes, Ravenna said, rising from her seat. Rest. Recover your strength. Tomorrow, the Duchess wishes to show you something that may help explain your purpose here. She moved toward the door but paused with her hand on the latch. Percy, thank you again for saving my life today. Whatever the prophecy means, whatever purpose brought you here, I'm glad you arrived when you did. After she left, Percy returned to the bed, the codex still in his hands. He opened it again, turning to where he'd left off in Naruto's story. As Naruto mastered the unique energies of Nevermore, he discovered his presence was changing the realm itself. Where he walked, the perpetual twilight brightened slightly. Plants grew more vibrantly. The citizens of Ravenscroft, long accustomed to shadows and whispers, began to speak more openly, to hope more freely. But not everyone welcomed these changes. The Whispering Council, guardians of Nevermore's ancient ways, saw Naruto's influence as a corruption of their realm's essential nature. They moved against him in secret, sending shadow constructs and nightmare beasts to eliminate the interloper. Naruto faced these threats with the same determination that had defined his life as a ninja. But Nevermore was not the shinobi world, and its dangers were unlike any he had known before. Percy closed the book, troubled by the parallels to his own situation. History seemed to be repeating itself, with him cast in Naruto's role. But to what end? He lay back on the bed, the codex resting on his chest, and stared at the ceiling. Stone gargoyles peered down at him from the corners, their eyes seeming to follow his movements. I'm not him, Percy said aloud, unsure if he was addressing the gargoyles, the book, or Nevermore itself. I'm not Naruto. I have my own destiny. The gargoyles offered no response, but Percy could have sworn the book warmed slightly against his chest, as if in acknowledgement. Sleep came eventually, and with it, dreams, not the prophetic nightmares he was accustomed to as a demigod, but vivid visions of a blonde-haired ninja fighting alongside a nine-tailed fox against shadows that threatened to consume a world of perpetual twilight. Percy awoke to a sound like distant thunder. He sat up quickly, the spiral codex sliding from his chest onto the bed. Sunlight, or what passed for it, in Nevermore, filtered through the tower windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Another rumble shook the tower slightly, and Percy moved to the window. The city of Ravenscroft spread out below, its Gothic spires and winding streets now familiar. But something was wrong. In the distance, beyond the city walls, a storm was gathering, not a natural storm, but a swirling vortex of darkness that seemed to consume the light around it. A knock at the door pulled his attention away from the window. Come in, he called, reaching for Riptide out of habit. The door opened to reveal not Ravenna, as he'd expected, but Cage. The shadow hand's pale eyes surveyed the room before settling on Percy with their usual suspicion. "The Duchess requires your presence," he said without preamble. "Immediately." "What's happening?" Percy asked, gesturing toward the window. "What is that storm?" "That," Cage replied grimly, "is why she needs to see you." "Bring the codex." Percy grabbed the book and followed Cage through the winding corridors of the castle. Servants and guards rushed past them, their faces tight with worry. The spirit wisps that had floated serenely the night before now darted about in agitated patterns, their colors shifting rapidly from cool blues and greens to anxious reds and yellows. They reached a part of the castle Percy hadn't seen before, a circular chamber at the very top of the central tower. The walls were made entirely of glass, offering a panoramic view of Nevermore in all directions. The Duchess stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by floating maps and diagrams composed of light. Ravenna was there as well, her hands moving through complex patterns as she manipulated the magical displays. "Percy Jackson," the Duchess said, turning to face him. Her black, eyes reflected the swirling storm visible through the windows. "I apologize for the abrupt summons, but we face an unexpected development." "The storm?" Percy asked, approaching the circle of light maps. "Not a storm," Ravenna corrected, her voice tense. "A breach. The veil between realms is tearing, just as the prophecy foretold." Percy looked closer at the magical displays. They showed Nevermore from above, with the city of Ravenscroft at the center. The storm appeared as a pulsing wound in the fabric of reality, about 10 miles beyond the city walls. "This began shortly after dawn," the Duchess explained. "It's growing steadily. At its current rate of expansion, it will reach the city by nightfall." "What exactly is coming through?" Percy asked, studying the breach. "Nothing yet," Cage said from behind him. "But our scouts report disturbances in the area, shadows moving against the wind, voices speaking in unknown languages. We believe it's a direct result of your arrival," the Duchess continued, her tone matter of fact rather than accusatory. "The Spiral Codex's third reader, completing the cycle described in the prophecy." Percy frowned. "But I didn't do anything to cause this." "Your mere presence may be enough," Ravenna said. "The Codex connects realities. Having it active in Nevermore again, especially with a reader as powerful as you, could be straining the boundaries between worlds." "So what do we do?" Percy asked. "How do we close it?" The Duchess and Ravenna exchanged glances. "That," the Duchess said, "is what I wished to show you this morning, before this crisis arose. There may be a way, but it requires understanding why the Codex brought you here in the first place." She gestured, and the light maps disappeared, replaced by a single glowing orb that expanded to show a different location, a massive temple or shrine built into the side of a mountain. Unlike the Gothic architecture of Ravenscroft, this structure featured elements that reminded Percy of Japanese design, with torii gates and stone fox statues guarding the entrance. "The Shrine of Convergence," the Duchess explained. "Built by Naruto Uzumaki during his time in Nevermore. Its street ends at a nexus point where the energies of multiple realms intersect. The nine-tailed sage created it as a means of stabilizing Nevermore," Ravenna added. "Before his arrival, our realm was even more chaotic, with frequent incursions from other worlds. The shrine channels and harmonizes these energies. But now it's failing," Cage interjected. "The breach is proof of that. We believe the shrine requires renewal," the Duchess said. "A ritual that must be performed by someone connected to both the Codex and to divine power, someone like you, Percy Jackson." Percy looked from the image of the shrine to the distant breach visible through the windows. "So I need to go to this shrine and perform some ritual." "What kind of ritual?" "That," the Duchess admitted, "we don't know precisely. The all instructions were recorded by the sage himself in a secret chamber within the shrine. Only one who bears the Codex can open it. And this shrine is, where, exactly?" The Duchess waved her hand, and the magical display shifted to show a map of the lands surrounding Ravenscroft. "Here, in the Whispering Mountains, 3 days' journey from the city." Percy did some quick mental calculation. You said the breach will reach the city by nightfall. We don't have 3 days. "No," the Duchess agreed. "Which is why I've ordered an evacuation of the outer districts. The castle and inner city have additional magical defenses that may hold for a time. Meanwhile, Cage added, his tone making it clear he didn't entirely approve of the plan, you and a small team will depart immediately for the shrine. If you can complete the ritual before the breach consumes Ravenscroft entirely, there's a chance you can reverse the damage. And if I can't? Percy asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Then Nevermore as we know it will cease to exist, the Duchess said simply. And you, Percy Jackson, will likely be trapped here as it collapses, unable to return to your own world. Percy took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, a familiar burden for a demigod who had faced world-ending threats before. When do we leave? Immediately, the Duchess replied. Ravenna will accompany you, as will Cage. The Shadow Hand's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't object. The journey will be dangerous, the Duchess continued. The breach is not the only threat. The Whispering Council will likely try to stop you, believing that completing the ritual will fulfill the prophecy and bring about Nevermore's destruction. They're wrong, Ravenna said firmly. The ritual will save Nevermore, not destroy it. You hope, Cage muttered. The Duchess silenced him with a look. Preparations have already been made. Supplies, mounts, and weapons await you in the courtyard. She approached Percy, her otherworldly face solemn. The fate of Nevermore rests with you, Percy Jackson. But know this, I believe the Codex chose you for a reason. You have both the power and the heart to succeed where others might fail. Percy nodded, trying to project more confidence than he felt. I'll do my best. That's all I can promise. Sometimes, the Duchess said with a small smile, that is enough. The courtyard was a flurry of activity when Percy, Ravenna, and Cage arrived. Servants rushed about, loading supplies onto 3 mounts that Percy initially mistook for horses. On closer inspection, he realized they were something else entirely, sleek, black creatures with 6 legs and eyes that glowed like embers. Shadow steeds, Ravenna explained, noticing his expression. Faster than horses, especially in difficult terrain. They can run for days without tiring. And they can move through shadows, Cage added, approaching one of the creatures and stroking its neck. A useful trait when speed is essential. Percy eyed the steeds warily. They look friendly. Ravenna smiled. They respond to confidence, show fear, and they'll be difficult to control. Great, Percy muttered. He approached the nearest steed, which turned its glowing eyes toward him and snorted, a sound like distant thunder. Hey there, he said, trying to channel his experience with blackjack and other Pegasi. We're going to be friends, right? The steed regarded him for a moment, then lowered its head slightly, allowing Percy to touch its muzzle. The creature's skin was warm and felt like velvet over steel. It likes you, Ravenna said, sounding surprised. They're usually more resistant to strangers. I have a way with horses, Percy replied. Or horse-adjacent creatures, anyway. Cage was checking the weapons strapped to his saddle, an assortment of curved blades and what looked like throwing stars, though they seemed to be made of the same shadow metal as his armor. We travel light and fast, he said, north through the Whispering Forest, then east into the mountains. If we push the steeds to their limits, we might reach the shrine by dawn tomorrow. The forest is dangerous after dark, Ravenna warned, securing her own supplies to her mount. Especially with the breach growing. We should try to clear it before nightfall. Percy checked Riptide in his pocket, then examined the additional weapons the Duchess had provided, a set of throwing knives that glowed faintly blue and a small vial of what Ravenna had called Essence of Dawn, supposedly effective against shadow creatures. The spiral codex was secured in a special pouch at his belt, its presence a constant reminder of the strange circumstances that had brought him to Nevermore. As they prepared to mount, a commotion at the castle entrance caught their attention. The Duchess emerged, accompanied by several guards and a figure Percy hadn't seen before, a tall, slender woman with skin the color of ivory and hair like spun silver. She wore armor of iridescent scales and carried a staff topped with a crystal that pulsed with inner light. The captain of the Dawn Guard, Ravenna whispered to Percy. Lyra Dawnbringer. The Duchess must be concerned indeed if she's sending her. The Duchess approached their group, the armored woman at her side. A change of plans, she announced. Captain, Dawnbringer will accompany you to the shrine. Her light magic may prove useful against whatever emerges from the breach. Cage frowned. We agreed on a small team, Your Grace. 4 draws more attention than 3. The situation has worsened, the Duchess replied. The breach is expanding faster than anticipated, and there are reports of Whispering Council agents gathering in the Whispering Forest. She turned to the silver-haired woman. Captain, you've been briefed. Yes, Your Grace, Lyra replied, her voice melodic yet commanding. Escort the outsider to the Shrine of Convergence, protect him while he performs the ritual. And return with all haste. Her pale blue eyes assessed Percy with professional detachment. I assume he can ride. He can also hear, Percy pointed out. And yes, I can ride. A ghost of a smile touched Lyra's lips. Good. Time is against us. She moved to the fourth shadow steed, which had appeared in the courtyard as if summoned by her presence. The Duchess addressed them one final time. The fate of Nevermore rests with you four. Trust in each other, move swiftly, and remember, the prophecy's meaning may not be what any of us have assumed. Her black eyes lingered on Percy. The Codex chose you. Trust in that choice. With those words of encouragement, they mounted their steeds and rode out of the castle gates, the shadow creatures moving with uncanny speed and silence through the streets of Ravenscroft. Citizens watched their passage with worried eyes, many already packing their belongings in preparation for the evacuation. As they approached the city gates, Percy looked back at the castle rising against the twilight sky, then at the distant breach, a wound in reality that grew visibly larger even as he watched. So, he said to his companion, as they passed through the gates and onto the road beyond, anyone want to tell me more about this Whispering Council we're trying to avoid? Cage's expression darkened. They are the oldest power in Nevermore. Some say they existed before the realm itself took shape. They believe they are the true guardians of Nevermore's essence, Ravenna added. They oppose change of any kind, seeing it as corruption. They particularly oppose the nine-tailed sage, Lyra said, her mount keeping pace easily with the others. His presence brought light to places long shrouded in darkness. They will oppose you for the same reason. But what exactly are they? Percy pressed. Humans. Gods. Something else. No one knows for certain, Ravenna admitted. They rarely show themselves directly, preferring to work through agents and constructs. The few who claim to have seen true council members describe them as shadows with eyes, voices without bodies. Comforting, Percy muttered. And they want to stop us because they think completing this ritual will destroy Nevermore. Yes, Cage said, though I'm not entirely convinced they're wrong. Ravenna shot him a sharp look. The Duchess believes. The Duchess hopes, Cage interrupted. But hope is not certainty. The prophecy is clear. When the spiral turns thrice, the veil between worlds will tear, and Nevermore will face its final twilight. Prophecies are rarely straightforward, Percy said, thinking of his own experiences with cryptic predictions. And, final twilight, could mean a lot of things. Indeed, Lyra agreed, surprising Percy with her support. It could mean an ending, or a transformation, or simply a change in the nature of twilight itself, which has been Nevermore's constant state since its creation. The road ahead led into a forest of twisted trees whose branches seemed to reach for them like grasping hands. The light dimmed further as they approached, the perpetual twilight of Nevermore deepening to near darkness beneath the canopy. The Whispering Forest, Ravenna said unnecessarily. Stay close. It's easy to become separated, and the forest has its own defenses against intruders. As if on cue, the trees ahead seemed to shift, the path between them narrowing. Their shadow steeds snorted nervously but continued forward at Cage's urging. It knows we're here, Lyra said quietly, her staff beginning to gl out with a soft light that illuminated their way. The forest is semi-sentient. It responds to intentions as much as actions. So think happy thoughts, Percy suggested. Think determined thoughts, Cage corrected. The forest respects strength of purpose. Doubt and fear will make it turn against us. Percy nodded, tightening his grip on the reins. He focused on his goal, reaching the shrine, performing the ritual, saving Nevermore, and finding his way home. The path ahead seemed to widen slightly in response. It's working, Ravenna said with approval. Keep that focus. They rode deeper into the forest, the twisted trees closing around them like a cage. The only sounds were the soft footfalls of their steeds and the occasional whisper that seemed to come from the trees themselves, words just beyond the edge of comprehension. The whispers grew louder as they ventured deeper into the forest, becoming almost intelligible, almost, but not quite. Percy strained to understand, catching fragments that sounded like warnings, questions, or perhaps threats. Don't listen too closely, Lyra advised, noticing his concentration. The whispers are designed to distract and confuse. They pull thou, GHTS from your own mind and reflect them back in ways meant to unsettle you. Charming place, Percy muttered, trying to ignore the voices that now seemed to be calling his name. They had been riding for nearly an hour when Cage suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. The shadow steeds stopped instantly, their glowing eyes fixed on something ahead. What is it? Ravenna whispered. Cage dismounted silently, drawing one of his curved blades. We're not alone. Percy followed his gaze and saw movement among the trees, flickers of shadow that seemed more purposeful than the natural darkness of the forest. He uncapped Riptide, the sword's celestial bronze glow casting strange patterns on the surrounding foliage. Whispering council agents? Percy asked quietly. No, Lyra replied, her staff glowing brighter as she raised it. Something else. Something from the breach. As if summoned by her words, the shadows coalesced into solid forms, humanoid figures with elongated limbs and featural SS faces save for gaping mouths filled with needle-like teeth. They moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like puppets controlled by an unskilled master. Void walkers, Ravenna breathed, her hands already weaving patterns of purple energy. They shouldn't be this far from the breach. The veil is thinning everywhere, Cage said grimly. These are just the first. There will be more. Percy counted, at least a dozen of the creatures surrounding them. Any tips for fighting these things? They feed on fear and doubt, Lyra said, dismounting gracefully. Stay focused on your purpose. And aim for T, center of their mass. That's where the void energy is concentrated. The void walkers began to close in, moving in an eerily coordinated pattern. One opened its mouth wider than should have been physically possible and emitted a sound that was part scream, part static, a noise that made Percy's teeth ache and his vision blur momentarily. They're trying to disorient us, Ravenna warned. Mental defenses up. Percy had no idea what mental defenses meant in Nevermore, but he'd faced mind-affecting enemies before. He concentrated on his connection to the sea, letting the familiar rhythm of waves center him as he prepared to fight. The first Void Walker lunged at him with surprising speed. Percy sidestepped and slashed with Riptide, the celestial bronze blade passing through the creature's arm with minimal resistance. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, hissing where it touched the ground. Their blood is acidic, Percy called out in warning. It's not blood, Cage replied, executing a perfect spinning attack that bisected two Void Walkers simultaneously. It's liquefied reality. Don't let it touch you. Percy didn't need to be told twice. He focused on keeping his strikes clean and precise, avoiding the spray of black ichor as he dispatched another Void Walker. Around him, his companions fought with impressive skill. Ravenna's magic manifested as whips of purple energy that she used to ensnare and crush the creatures from a safe distance. Cage moved like a shadow himself, appearing and disappearing around the battlefield, his blades a constant blur of motion. And Lyra was a vision of deadly grace, her staff extending into a spear of pure light that she wielded with the precision of a master. Despite their individual prowess, the Void Walkers kept coming, more emerging from between the trees with each passing moment. They seemed to be learning, adapting to the group's fighting styles, becoming harder to hit. We can't stay here, Lyra called out, impaling a Void Walker through what passed for its chest. The longer we fight, the more will come. We need to break through, Cage agreed, appearing beside Percy after dispatching another creature. Head northeast. The forest thins about 2 miles ahead. Percy nodded, forming a quick plan. Ravenna, can you create a barrier? Something to hold them back while we mount up. Temporarily, she replied, her face straw-ined with effort as she maintained her energy whips. But it won't last long against this many. It doesn't need to, Percy said. Just long enough for us to get a head start. He turned to Lyra. Can your light magic create a flash bright enough to blind them? The captain of the Dawn Guard smiled grimly. Absolutely. Good. On my signal, Ravenna creates a barrier, Lyra blinds them, and we all mount up and ride like hell. Cage, you lead since you know the way. Percy looked at each of them, receiving nods of agreement. Ready, now. Ravenna thrust her hands outward, and a dome of purple energy expanded around them, pushing the Void Walkers back. Simultaneously, Lyra raised her staff high and channeled her power into it. The crystal at its tip flared with blinding white light, so intense that Percy had to shield his eyes despite being prepared for it. The Void Walkers shrieked in pain, their featureless faces contorting as they recoiled from the light. In that moment of confusion, Percy and his companions mounted their shadow steeds. "Go!" Percy shouted as Ravenna's barrier began to flicker and fade. The shadow steeds leapt forward, weaving between trees with impossible agility. Cage led the way, his mount seeming to meld with the shadows between trees, emerging on the other side without slowing. Percy's steed followed, its 6 legs moving in perfect coordination as it carried him through the forest at breakneck speed. Behind them, the Void Walkers gave chase, their unnatural screams echoing through the trees. But the shadow steeds were faster, gradually increasing the distance between hunters and hunted. They rode hard for what felt like hours, the twisted trees of the whispering forest gradually thinning as Cage had promised. The whispers faded, replaced by a heavy silence that was somehow even more unnerving. Finally, they emerged from the forest onto a rocky plain. In the distance, mountains rose against the twilight sky, their peaks shrouded in mist. And beyond them, visible even from this distance, the breach pulsed and grew, a wound in reality that seemed to consume the very air around it. Cage signaled for them to slow their pace, allowing the Shadow steeds to recover from their frantic escape. "We've lost them for now," he said, scanning the plain behind them. "But they'll pick up our trail again soon enough." "What were those things?" Percy asked, still processing the encounter. "You called them Void Walkers. Entities from beyond the veil," Ravenna explained, her face pale from the exertion of maintaining her barrier. "They exist in the space between realities. Normally, they can't manifest physically in Nevermore, but the breach is changing that. They're drawn to instability," Lyra added. "And right now, you're the biggest source of instability in Nevermore, Percy Jackson." "Me? Why me specifically?" "Because you don't belong here," Cage said bluntly. "Your presence disrupts the natural order, creates ripples in the fabric of Nevermore. The Void Walkers sense that disruption and are drawn to it." "Great," Percy muttered. "So I'm basically wearing a 'come eat me' sign for interdimensional monsters." "More or less," Cage agreed, without humor. "Which is why we need to reach the shrine as quickly as possible. Either you complete the ritual and stabilize Nevermore, or the Void Walkers are the least of our problems," Ravenna finished. "The breach will continue to grow until it consumes everything." Percy looked toward the mountains, trying to gauge the distance. "How much farther to the shrine?" "We'll reach the foothills by nightfall," Lyra said. "Then it's a climb to the shrine itself, which sits halfway up the tallest peak. If we push on through the night, we might reach it by dawn. Assuming nothing else tries to kill us along the way," Percy added. "A bold assumption in Nevermore," Cage said dryly. They urged their steeds forward again, crossing the rocky plain at a steady pace that wouldn't exhaust the creatures. As they rode, Percy found himself alongside Ravenna, who was studying him with curious eyes. "You fought well back there," she said. "Those techniques you used, they weren't just the water manipulation I saw yesterday. You're accessing more of the Codex's knowledge." Percy nodded. "It's strange. The information just seems to be there when I need it, like muscle memory for things I've never actually done before. The Nine-Tailed Sage's knowledge, integrated with your own abilities," Ravenna mused. "A unique combination. In all the histories of Nevermore, there's no record of Somio. Nay, blending demigod powers with chakra techniques. Lucky me," Percy said. "I get to be the first test case." Ravenna smiled slightly. "You remind me of him, you know. The sage. Not physically. The high stories describe him as fair-haired and blue-eyed, but in spirit. The same determination, the same willingness to face the impossible." "You talk about him like you knew him personally," Percy observed. "In a way, I did," Ravenna replied, her voice softening. "My ancestor was his closest companion in Nevermore. Her journals describe their adventures in detail. I grew up reading stories of the Nine-Tailed Sage and his impact on our world." "What happened to him?" "The book, the Codex, doesn't say." Ravenna's expression grew solemn. "No one knows for certain. After he built the Shrine of Convergence, and performed the first ritual to stabilize Nevermore, he simply vanished. Some believe he returned to his original world. Others think he ascended to a higher plane of existence. My ancestors Finn. Al journal entry simply states, he has gone to where the spiral meets the sea. Percy frowned. The spiral meets the sea. What does that mean? I've pondered that question my entire life, Ravenna admitted. The spiral clearly refers to the symbol of the nine-tailed sage. But the sea, Nevermore has no true oceans, only the void sea at the edge of our realm, which no one has ever successfully navigated. Percy thought of his own connection to the sea, wondering if there was some significance to the fact that the Codex had chosen him, a son of Poseidon, as its third reader. Before he could pursue that line of thought, Cage called out from the front of their group. Riders approaching from the east. Percy looked up to see a group of mounted figures on the horizon, moving rapidly toward them. Unlike their shadow steeds, these riders were mounted on creatures that resembled skeletal horses with manes of blue fire. Whispering council outriders, Lyra said, her voice tight. They must have been watching the forest exit. How many? Percy asked, counting at least 8 figures. Too many for a direct confrontation, Cage replied. We need to change course. Head for the Fissure of Echoes. We can lose them there. The fissure is unstable at the best of times, Ravenna protested. With the breach growing, it could be catastrophic. We have no choice, Cage insisted. The outriders will overtake us on open ground. At least in the fissure, their numbers won't matter as much. Lyra nodded in agreement. Cage is right. The fissure is our best option. They veered northwest, their shadow steeds sensing the urgency and increasing their pace. The outriders adjusted their course immediately, confirming that Percy and his companions were indeed their targets. They're gaining, Ravenna warned, glancing back. Percy could now make out details of their pursuers, figures in hooded cloaks of midnight blue, their faces obscured by masks similar to the shadow constructs he had fought in Ravenscroft. Each carried a staff topped with a blue flame that matched their mounts' fiery manes. Almost there, Cage called out, pointing ahead to where the ground appeared to drop away suddenly. As they drew closer, Percy saw that it wasn't merely a drop but a massive crack in the earth, as if some giant hand had cleaved the plain in two. The fissure was perhaps 50 feet across at its wide point and extended as far as he could see in either direction. From its depths came an eerie blue glow and what sounded like distant voices echoing off stone. The Fissure of Echoes, Ravenna explained quickly. A wound in Nevermore from an ancient cataclysm. It echoes with fragments of other realities. Stay close and don't listen to the voices, they'll try to lure you deeper. How do we cross it? Percy asked, seeing no obvious bridge or passage. We don't cross, Cage replied. We enter. Without further explanation, he urged his steed directly toward the edge of the fissure and, to Percy's astonishment, leapt into the chasm. Follow him, Lyra commanded, her steed already moving to make the same jump. The shadow steeds know the way. Percy exchanged a quick glance with Ravenna, who nodded reassuringly. Trust the steed, she said, before guiding her mount over the edge. Taking a deep breath, Percy gave his shadow steed its head. The creature gathered itself and leapt into the fissure with powerful grace. For a heart-stopping moment, they were in free fall, the blue glow from below growing brighter as they descended. Then, impossibly, the steed's hooves found purchase on what appeared to be nothing but air. It ran down the side of the fissure as if gravity had been tilted 90 degrees, moving with the same sure-footed confidence it had shown on level ground. Percy looked up, or what was now, back, to see the outriders reach the edge of the fissure. They halted their mounts, clearly unwilling to follow the same path. They won't pursue us here, Cage called out, his verses. OICE echoing strangely in the confines of the fissure. Their mounts can't navigate the fissure's pathways like our shadow steeds. Percy looked around in wonder as they descended deeper. The walls of the fissure were not solid rock as he had expected, but a crystalline substance that reflected and refracted the blue light, creating the illusion of endless space in all directions. And within those reflections, he caught glimpses of other places. A village of wooden buildings and faces carved into a mountainside. A city of towering skyscrapers. A camp with cabins arranged in a horseshoe pattern around a central fire. Camp Half-Blood, Percy whispered, recognizing the last image. How is this possible? The fissure exists at a point where multiple realities intersect, Ravenna explained, her voice hushed with reverence. It shows echoes of other worlds, particularly those connected to people within it. You're seeing your home. The shadow steeds continued their impossible descent, eventually reaching the bottom of the fissure where a narrow path wound between pools of glowing blue liquid. The air here was thick with whispers, fragments of conversations from 1,000 different realities, overlapping and intertwining. Stay focused, Lyra warned. The echoes will try to draw you in, show you what you most desire. It's an illusion. Percy nodded, though it was difficult to IGN, or the voices that now seemed to be calling his name specifically. He heard his mother, Annabeth, Grover, all asking him to come home, telling him they needed him. Not real, he muttered to himself. Focus on the mission. They followed the winding path deeper into the fissure, the crystalline walls closing in around them until they were riding single file through a tunnel barely wide enough for their steeds. The blue glow intensified, and the whispers grew more insistent. Almost through, Cage called back. The eastern exit is just ahead. Percy was about to respond when a new voice cut out the cacophony of whispers, a voice that seemed to speak directly into his mind rather than his ears. Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon, third reader of the Spiral Codex. He pulled his steed to a halt, looking around for the source of the voice. Did you hear that? He asked Ravenna, who had stopped behind him. She shook her head, concern evident in her violet eyes. Hear what? They cannot hear me. I speak only to you. I am the guardian of the threshold, the keeper of the spiral path. There's something here, Percy said, his hand going to Riptide. Something talking to me. Cage and Lyra had noticed their delay and turned back. What's wrong? Lyra asked, her staff raised defensively. Percy's hearing voices, Ravenna explained. Something specific, not just the usual echoes. Cage's eyes narrowed. Quote, Cage's eyes narrowed. The Guardian. It's never spoken to anyone in living memory. The Shadow Hand speaks truth. I have been silent since the nine-tailed sage departed. But now, the third turning of the spiral approaches, and I must warn you. Warn me about what? Percy asked aloud, drawing confused looks from his companions. The ritual at the shrine is not what you have been told. The prophecy has been misinterpreted by both the Duchess and the Whispering Council. Final Twilight is neither destruction nor transformation, it is revelation. Percy frowned. Revelation of what? The true nature of Nevermore. The reason for the Codex. The purpose of your coming. Can you be a little more specific? Percy asked, frustration edging his voice. I cannot. The laws that bind me prevent direct disclosure. But I can tell you this. When you reach the shrine, seek the chamber beneath the fox statue. There you will find what the nine-tailed sage left for his successor. His successor? You mean me? The spiral turns thrice. The first was the sage himself. The second was the healer who came after. You are the third, the one who bridges worlds. Before Percy could ask more questions, the voice faded, and the blue glow of the fissure dimmed momentarily before brightening again. What did it say? Ravenna asked urgently. Percy hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. It said the prophecy has been misinterpreted. That, final twilight, means revelation, not destruction or transformation. Revelation, Lyra repeated, her pale eyes thoughtful. Revelation of what? It wouldn't say exactly, but it mentioned a chamber beneath the fox statue at the shrine. Something the nine-tailed sage left for whoever came next. Cage's expression was unreadable. The Guardian has never been known to lie, but its messages are often cryptic. We should proceed with caution. Agreed, Lyra said, but we should also keep moving. The Whispering Council may have other agents, searching for alternate routes to intercept us. They continued through the crystalline tunnel, the whispers gradually fading as they approached what Cage had called the eastern exit. Percy's mind raced with questions. What revelation awaited at the shrine? What had Naruto left behind? And why was he, specifically, chosen as the third turning of the spiral? The tunnel widened suddenly, opening into a vast chamber where the blue glow was brightest. The source of the light became apparent, a pool of luminescent liquid that occupied the center of the chamber, its surface perfectly still despite the slight breeze that flowed through the space. The echo pool, Ravenna whispered reverently. They say it shows not reflections, but possibilities. We don't have time for sightseeing, Cage said tersely. The exit is just beyond. But as they guided their steeds around the pool, its surface suddenly rippled, as if disturbed by an unseen force. The blue light intensified, becoming almost blinding. And images began to form on the liquid surface. Percy couldn't look away. The pool showed him standing at what he assumed was the Shrine of Convergence, the spiral codex open in his hands. Enter. GY swirled around him. Not just the chakra he had accessed through the book, but his own demigod powers amplified to levels he had never achieved before. The image shifted, showing the breach in reality closing. The tear in the veil healing itself. But then the scene changed again. The shrine began to transform, its structure shifting and expanding. The mountains around it flattened, and the purport UAL twilight of Nevermore brightened to full daylight. The landscape itself was changing, becoming. Camp Half-Blood, Percy whispered, recognizing the transformed terrain. And that's Manhattan in the distance. The image shifted once more, showing two worlds overlapping, merging, Nevermore and Earth becoming a single reality. Impossible, Cage breathed, his usual composure shaken. The ritual is supposed to stabilize the boundaries between worlds, not dissolve them. Unless that's what final twilight truly means, Ravenna said slowly. Not the end of Nevermore, but the end of its separation from other realms. Lyra's face had gone pale. If this is true, then both the Duchess and the Whispering Council are wrong. The ritual won't save Nevermore as we know it, nor will it destroy it entirely. It will transform it into something new. Something neither fully Nevermore nor fully your world, Percy. The pool's surface stilled suddenly, the images fading back into blue light. Percy stared at the now calm water, trying to process what he had seen. If the vision was accurate, completing the ritual wouldn't just close the breach, it would fundamentally alter both Nevermore and his own world, merging them into a new reality. We need to keep moving, Cage said after a moment of heavy silence. The echo pool shows possibilities, not certainties. We can debate its meaning once we're clear of the fissure. They continued past the pool and through another crystalline tunnel that sloped gradually upward. After several minutes of climbing, they emerged from the fissure onto a rocky plateau. The Whispering Mountains loomed directly ahead, much closer than they had been before their detour. The fissure saved us half a day's journey, Lyra observed, looking at the position of the strange muted sun that never quite set in Nevermore's sky. We might reach the shrine before midnight if we push on. Percy glanced back at the breach in the distance, which had grown noticeably larger during their time in the fissure. We need to hurry. That thing isn't slowing down. They urged their shadow steeds forward, crossing the plateau and beginning the ascent into the mountains. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, but the six-legged mounts navigated the rocky slopes with surprising agility. As they climbed higher, Percy found himself riding beside Cage, who had been unusually quiet since they left the echo pool. You don't trust me, do you? Percy asked directly. Cage considered the question before answering. I don't trust the codex. Or prophecies. Or visions in magical pools. He glanced at Percy. But I do respect capability, and you've demonstrated that. Whether your presence will save Nevermore or transform it beyond recognition remains to be seen. For what it's worth, I don't want to change your world, Percy said. I just want to stop that breach and find a way home. Your intentions may be irrelevant, Cage replied. The Codex has its own agenda. It chose you for a reason, just as it chose the nine-tailed sage centuries ago. His coming changed Nevermore forever, bringing light to a realm of shadow. Perhaps your coming will complete that transformation. And you don't want that. What I want is immaterial. I serve the Duchess, and she believes this is the only way to save our realm. Cage's pale eyes fixed on the distant breach. But I have lived in Nevermore's shadows all my life. I understand their value, their necessity. Too much light can be as blinding as too much darkness. Before Percy could respond, Ravenna called out from behind them. Riders on our trail, coming up from the fissure. They turned to see a group of mounted figures emerging from the same exit they had used, their blue-flamed steeds moving swiftly across the plateau. Whispering Council, Lyra confirmed grimly. They must have found another way through the fissure. How did they track us? Percy asked. The Codex, Cage said. It leaves a trace in the fabric of Nevermore that their seers can follow. We need to reach higher ground, Ravenna urged. The path narrows ahead. We can defend it more easily. They spurred their steeds to greater speed, climbing rapidly up the mountain path. As Ravenna had predicted, the trail soon narrowed, with a sheer cliff face on one side and a steep drop on the other. They dismounted at a point where the path was barely wide enough for two people to stand abreast. "This is where we make our stand," Lyra said, her staff already glowing with power. "Ravenna, can you create a barrier behind us once they enter the narrow section?" Ravenna nodded, her hands beginning to weave patterns of energy. "I can trap them on the path, but not for long. Their magic is ancient and powerful." "It doesn't need to be long," Cage said, drawing his curved blades. "Just long enough." Percy uncapped Riptide and concentrated, feeling the dual energies within him, the familiar pull of his demigod powers and the newer, vibrant force of chakra. He formed a hand sign with his free hand, focusing his intent. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Two identical copies of Percy appeared beside him, each holding a perfect replica of Riptide. The clones took positions on either side of the original, creating a formidable front line. "Neat trick," Lyra commented, raising an eyebrow. "Comes in handy," Percy replied with a grim smile. They didn't have to wait long. The Whispering Council Outriders approached the narrow section of path, slowing their mounts as they assessed the defenders' position. There were 10 of them, each wearing the midnight blue cloaks and masks that concealed their features. The lead rider raised a staff, and a voice echoed across the distance, not spoken aloud, but projected directly into their minds. Similar to how the Guardian had communicated with Percy. "Bearers of the Codex, surrender the book and the outsider, and the rest of you may live. Resist, and you will all perish." "Charming offer," Percy muttered. "But I think we'll pass. You do not understand what you risk, Percy Jackson. The ritual will not save Nevermore, it will unmake it, and your world as well. The boundaries between realms exist for a reason." "Maybe," Percy called back, "but I've seen what happens when that breach keeps growing. At least the ritual gives us a chance. A fool's chance, based on a misinterpreted prophecy. The nine-tailed sage never intended for the worlds to merge. He sought balance, not convergence." Percy hesitated, the words striking uncomfortably close to his own doubts after seeing the Echo Pool's vision. But before he could respond, Cage stepped forward. "Enough talk. The Duchess has made her decision. The ritual will proceed." The lead outrider lowered its staff. "Then you leave us no choice." As one, the outriders raised their staffs, and blue fire erupted from the tips, coalescing into a wave of energy that surged toward the defenders. "Now," Lyra shouted. Ravenna thrust her hands forward, creating a barrier of purple energy that intercepted the blue fire. The two forces collided in a spectacular display of light and power, sending shockwaves through the narrow pass. "The barrier won't hold for long," Ravenna warned, her face strained with effort. "They're channeling the power of the entire council. Then we take the fight to them," Percy decided. He turned to his clones. "You two, with me. Cage, Lyra, cover Ravenna and be ready to move up when the barrier falls." Without waiting for agreement, Percy and his clones charged forward, passing through Ravenna's barrier as if it were designed to allow them passage. They raced toward the Outriders, who seemed momentarily surprised by the aggressive tactic. The lead Outrider recovered quickly, directing a blast of blue fire directly at Percy. He dodged to the side while his clones split in opposite directions, flanking the group. Percy channeled chakra into Riptide, causing the blade to glow with a combination of its natural celestial bronze light and a blue energy that spiraled along its length. Water style. Tidal blade. He slashed through the air, and a crescent of water materialized from the ambient moisture, amplified by his chakra. The water blade sliced through the lead Outrider's staff, severing it cleanly. The blue flame at its tip sputtered and died. The Outriders broke formation, engaging Percy and his clones individually. They were skilled fighters, wielding their staffs like quarter-staves, enhanced with bursts of blue fire that scorched the ground where they struck. Percy parried a blow from one Outrider, then countered with a chakra-enhanced kick that sent the figure stumbling backward. His clones were similarly engaged, one fighting two Outriders simultaneously while the other had man aged to disarm its opponent and was pressing the advantage. Behind them, Ravenna's barrier finally collapsed under the sustained assault. Cage and Lyra immediately moved forward, entering the fray with practiced coordination. Cage seemed to melt into the shadows between combatants, appearing behind outriders to strike with surgical precision. Lyra's staff extended into a spear of pure light that she wielded with deadly efficiency, each thrust leaving trails of radiance in the air. Despite being outnumbered, Percy and his companions were holding their own, until one of the outriders broke away from the main battle and raised its staff toward the cliff face above. "Look out!" Percy shouted, recognizing the danger too late. Blue fire struck the mountainside, and with a deafening rumble, rocks began to fall. An avalanche cascaded down toward the narrow path where they fought. Percy reacted instinctively, drawing on both his demigod powers and the chakra techniques from the codex. He slammed his palm into the ground. Water style. Rising dragon wall. A massive wall of water erupted from the ground, solidifying into a barrier of ice that arched over them just as the avalanche hit. Rocks and debris crashed against the ice shield, which cracked but held under the onslaught. The effort of maintaining such a large-scale technique drained Percy rapidly. His clones dissipated in puffs of smoke as he channeled all his energy into the shield. When the last of the debris had fallen, he released the technique, the ice wall collapsing into a shower of water that drenched everyone on the path. In the confusion, the outriders pressed their advantage. One of them struck Ravenna with a glancing blow, sending her stumbling toward the edge of the cliff. Lyra moved to intercept, but was blocked by two other attackers. Percy saw Ravenna teeter on the brink and lunged for her, catching her wrist just as she began to fall. The momentum pulled him dangerously close to the edge himself. "Hold on," he grunted, trying to pull her back up while maintaining his own precarious position. An outrider approached, staff raised to strike them both. But before the blow could fall, a shadow seemed to detach itself from the cliff face. Cage materialized behind the outrider, his blade flashing once. The figure collapsed, its staff clattering to the ground. With Cage's help, Percy pulled Ravenna back onto the path. She was pale but uninjured, her violet eyes wide with the near miss. "Thank you," she gasped. Percy nodded, then turned to assess the battle. The avalanche and their coordinated defense had taken a toll on both sides. Half the outriders were down, either unconscious or worse. But Lyra was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, and Cage was favoring his left arm. "We need to end this quickly," Percy said. "The breach is still growing, and we're wasting time and energy here." "Agreed," Cage said. "But how? They're blocking the path completely." Percy looked at the remaining outriders, then at the narrow path. And finally at the cliff face. An idea formed. Risky, but potentially effective. "I need you all to trust me," he said. "And be ready to run when I give the signal." Without waiting for questions, Percy sheathed Riptide and formed a series of hand signs he'd never used before but somehow knew perfectly. He felt chakra gathering in his lungs, mixing with his natural affinity for water. Water style. Hidden mist jutsu. He exhaled, and a thick fog billowed out, quickly enveloping the entire path. Visibility dropped to near zero, concealing everyone from view. "Now," Percy said quietly to his companions, "follow me and stay close." He led them forward, moving silently through the mist. The outriders were calling to each other, trying to maintain formation in the blinding fog. Percy guided his group right to the edge of the path, where it dropped away into the abyss. "Ravenna," he whispered, "can you create a platform? Something we can use to bypass them entirely." She nodded, understanding his plan. Her hands moved in complex patterns, and a translucent purple disk formed in the air just off the edge of the cliff. "It will hold our weight, but not for long," she warned. "And I can only create one at a time." "That's all we need," Percy assured her. "One at a time, step onto the platform and move about 20 feet forward, parallel to the path. Ravenna goes last so she can maintain control of the platform." Lyra went first, stepping cautiously.